I was really hesitant to make this kind of a video or to speak on voice feminization because I'm not a specialist in the area, but I have a friend who I've talked with her, I've worked with her for years. I never gave her a lesson, I never did any of that. I just tried to find very good resources for her. 2 years later, there's nothing. She went to specialists. She paid a lot of money for specialists, and it just wasn't helpful. And the things that they were teaching were frustrating. They were frustrating for me. I don't claim to be an expert. I'm a voice teacher. I put a lot of emphasis on voice and speech pathology as well as anatomy. I'm gonna show just a few tricks because I see a lot of people actually catching on to some of the right stuff in the discussion of this forum. Some of the pieces aren't put all together because it's not available anywhere seemingly. I don't know. I think this. I don't know. I hope this is useful. And I hope that this is an area of study that gets way more attention than it currently does. It's unacceptable. But here we are. Let's start with the thing that a lot of people get right. You're raising your larynx. Cool. But there are things that get in the way of doing that in such a way that you would be able to do it comfortably and for long periods of time and also not sound so strained. Because I imagine that the sentiment is voice feminization doesn't mean voice weakening, right? You want to be able to speak high, but then also be assertive in that range. So this is going to be helpful for that. So what we're looking at, oh my goodness, there we go, that's the right button. What we're looking at here is the hyoid bone. So you have to pardon me with this being a decapitated head, but this is the larynx right here, and the hyoid bone is on top. So this is the omohyoid muscle. What matters more than the particular muscle itself is where the insertions are. So this doesn't exactly represent it, but it is on the top of the larynx there because it's connected to the hyoid bone or cartilage, something. Now it's kind of difficult to see in this particular picture. I wish my Blender thing could easily show this, but it's connected to the scapula. The implications for this are tremendous. On one hand, you have this very little thing with this even smaller. There we go, that's the word. This even smaller muscle that goes into the scapula. And so the scapula gets pulled down by a lot of really strong muscles, particularly of consequence are the trapezius major, right? So this happens, right, when there's back tension and when there's an imbalance, which happens all the time. It's a very common thing to have happen. So this is the importance of discussing it, right? If I'm doing this, the omohyoid pulls down on the hyoid bone, which lowers the larynx. Now, luckily for this, actually, the solution for this is actually not dramatic, and it's kind of something that anybody should do probably in their life. There are no excessive workouts you need to do. There's no stretches. I mean, all that would help, but the most helpful thing is a simple cardio exercise like walking, like literally walking. I do salsa because, I like to think that I'm not chronically Caucasian, but I am. I need to come to terms with that, so I'm not in denial. But jokes aside, the simple rotation of the torso with walking or salsa is going to loosen up the muscles that are going to get in the way of you raising your larynx comfortably. Because if you take your bicep, if you try to move it and tighten the bicep at the same time, it's quite difficult. And certainly you can't get like a nice, big, meaty bicep muscle like a bodybuilder. Point is that movement helps. What I personally do for my singing training is I just 30 minutes, maybe 3 days a week. And so again, this has other benefits too, right? So it's not like you have to go through a lot of hoops to be able to do this. And so, but just to discuss what actually happens is that as these muscles loosen up and this is not being tightened and pulled down, the larynx can more easily rise. There are things that are worth talking about that can get in the way of this, certain exercise philosophies. Anything that is hyper aggressive, particularly ab workouts, that's going to be counter to what you want to do. Ab workouts, especially ones that target the transverse. So if you look at this, this is the transverse abdominus. It's under the six-pack, the rectus or whatever, right? So if you look at it, the shape is actually, it's kind of counter to the lats. The lats would be kind of like behind right here, right? The transverse going all the way up to the breast. In Pilates, the transverse abdominus, as well as a lot of different exercise philosophies, but particularly Pilates. And I know this because I was a certified instructor at UPenn, which sounds way more impressive than it actually is. No shitting on that program, but and this is why I don't have friends. But the idea of like in and up, it's very ballet. That would be another one is ballet, where the abs are in and up. What that does is it'll move you forward, right? If you contract your transverse abdominus, this will happen to your shoulders. So if you let the transverse do its thing, this is what will happen. Now, if you're going to tighten and constrict and not have flexible muscles in your abs, the only way to have an upright posture will be this. So let me get you a better view. So just to give a proper visual, this camera shot is of my abs, and obviously these are shoulders. So if I do abs in and up, that's going to happen. You can see the contraction, right? And so it only makes sense that in order to stay upright, I have to do this. So any fitness philosophy that heavily targets the abs, you have to be wary of this. Now, that's not to say that you can't work out. I personally, because my priority is the best singing I can possibly have physically. I just do like salsa, I do walks, any exercise where there's a tremendous amount of motion that also targets the abs, that's very much fine. Especially like you can do sit-ups, right? You can do Pilates just after the fact. Do an exercise like a salsa or a long walk. And so these are the things that can get in the way of raising the larynx. But there are also other consequences to not just the muscular motion of raising the larynx that gets obstructed. It's made more difficult. It's also there's a quality of sound that gets lost, and I'll explain this. I think it's fun. So this is a spectrogram. This one I paid for because it goes above 5 hertz, and you can kind of see that the maximum frequencies, it's frequencies and time. And you can see that the highest frequencies are there, but you don't necessarily need to do that. There are free ones online. Academo is one that comes to mind. Literally, it's just spectrogram free. And then you need to change your input to be a microphone. You know what, I'll actually walk through that at the end, but let's make the point here. So if I raise my larynx, which I'm going to do by swallowing, and then once my swallow hits the apex of the motion, I'm just going to kind of keep it there a little bit. And so here we are. Now this is something that, sounds okay, but if you look at the spectrogram, you're going to see a big difference in my adjustment when I get rid of the contraction of the back. So now I'm still raising my larynx, but I'm using shoulder rolls to make sure, and I'm really letting the motion kind of take over. And as I'm doing this, what allows to have happen is the sides of the soft palate are allowed to lift, and this creates more resonance and a lot more comfort. So if I do this, and I keep trying to raise my larynx, we're going to see that those higher frequencies are less pronounced than when I do this. So, okay, back muscles, tension, fix it, got it. We're not quite done though. There are other factors. That one's probably just the biggest factor, but there is another factor, breath, which is going to sound weird, but if you think about it, there is a logic to it. Your vocal folds, in order to go higher, they become thinner. And so they become very, very affected by breath, more so than they would if you were in your lower range. So, of course, that has its own obstacles as well, but for now, let's stay on point. Having really good posture can absolutely help prevent the breath from like really coming out from the torso on an exhale or just in existence. Like, think of it like a balloon, right? There's so much more air that comes out when you squeeze it. So the posture really helps, but it's also a matter of speaking in a way that is a little bit more relaxed so that there's not as much tension there. And the contraction ends up, getting in the way of the amount of air pressure that will give you the most feminization. I don't even know if that's the term. I apologize. So this is an exercise that I do Not everybody can do it just because of the way that the tongue is that thing that I forget what that's called, but some people have that excessively large, and so they can't do this exercise, but most people can. And if you can't, I have some other ones for you. But this exercise really helps with breath. Now, I generally, because I'm a singer, I use that in the context of vocals. You don't have to. If you do this, if you do all the shoulder rolls and you're feeling good and you've done your posture work just for a light amount of time, you can then go and do this and just imagine you're having a conversation. So yesterday I was at the store. So the reason why we do these raspberries is because the other thing that can really push down the larynx is this channel is called Singing in the MRI, and it's good. I'm just going to be a curmudgeon and say that this is not this is not a good representation of what operatic technique is in general, but that's totally not the topic. So we're going to. This is the tongue. I think people don't quite appreciate how big this thing is, right? This is a very large muscle, and right here is the larynx. Well, I mean, this is the epiglottis. I swear I know what I'm talking about. But you can see, and this is a male singer, so we're talking about, testosterone-laden folds is the accurate term. So this is someone who has a larger larynx, and it still just absolutely pales in comparison to the tongue as a muscle. So just like the scapula going back creates a muscle contraction far stronger than that of raising the larynx, so too does this happen with the tongue if the tongue is going down and back. So that's why these raspberry exercises are extremely beneficial. I used to get very self-conscious about these things when I started to learn singing, so I would go into the bathroom and do these exercises, figuring that no one would be able to tell the difference. For the most part, that was correct. So even if you can't find a space on a regular basis to do these things because stupid policy bullshit, even if you can't find a space, when you go home, you can actually, it doesn't take very long, maybe 5 minutes twice a day at different times in the day, and we can get into why that is the case with myelin, and maybe we'll go on that long because I think it's important and interesting, but let's get to the simple stuff first so that you can immediately. So there's this is something that I like to call, and probably others have said it as well, the Disney technique. The idea behind the Disney technique is they take a singer who's in their 20s, late 20s, early 30s, and they use this technique to create a kind of voice that is reminiscent of more of a teenager. And so here you have fantastic singers with these massively powerful voices doing this one thing that allows them to comfortably sing higher with a little bit less of that lower resonance. Okay, so how do we do it? The Disney technique is it's a classical singing with a raised larynx. I don't know why the raise is a punching motion. That's probably not. But it's classical singing with a raised larynx. Now the tongue exercise actually by itself will give you a lot. It will check a lot of the boxes that happen in classical singing. And so what you can do is you can kind of reference this Disney technique. And so you do that swallow thing, you make sure the muscles are relaxed, you do that swallow thing, you get that larynx to be higher, which, by the way, even with all that tension release, is still going to take some physical development to get comfortable and make the muscles responsible for the larynx a little stronger. But if it's excessively difficult, or you can't do it for long times, or you're just unable to do it, that's definitely the larger muscles impacting those small muscles. I hope I'm not belaboring the point. I just it is the point, so I want to emphasize it. Does that make it sound better? Anyway, Disney technique. I'm going to go from this little town, what a quiet village, to this little town, what a quiet village, every day like the one before, right? So that's definitely much higher and a little bit more comfortable resonance. And so what you can do is you can do in conversation, and then also do while singing, And what you'll be able to do then is do a and then not, right? Little town, little town. And you want to do this not infrequently is not the correct word. I also despise the term muscle memory, and we'll get into why that's actually not very beneficial. So yeah, larger muscle groups, cardio with rotation, even if it's just subtle, like salsa or walking. Then we have an exercise that will help you learn more about breath and how much your exhale can impact your sound. And then finally, that same exercise addressing the massive muscle that is the tongue to get it out of the way of raising the larynx. So how do you practice this? Because some of this might sound intimidating, right? Like, 30 minutes of walking 3 times a week, I can do that. 30 minutes of walking 3 times a week, and now I have to do tongue farts in the bathroom or in my house, and what? And then it's also breath, training the muscles, farting a lot. It can get overwhelming, but once you understand a little bit about how the human brain kind of memorizes things, I promise it'll get a lot easier. This in general has helped me with my anxiety, just kind of knowing this, and I hope it helps you. Okay, so this is a nerve, and you'll see that big kind of pinkish thing being labeled as the myelin sheath. Myelin is a little fatty tissue, and the sheath is what wraps around the nerve. Now, interestingly enough, what builds this sheath, what creates the myelin, is recollection. So this idea that muscle memory, that if you just do it 8 hours a day, that's going to make the difference, is actually quite counter to what's productive. And I'm not making this up. You can read about myelin. I highly recommend the book Make It Stick. It's a collection of Harvard studies. This is the actual book if you're interested. I love this. It also comes in audio. Anyway, the point here is that recollection is ultimately what develops the myelin sheath. So the idea here is to practice a little bit, and then practice it again. So this is why shorter workouts, shorter practice sessions, just kind of trying stuff a little bit, and then taking a step back and doing it again. The value in that comes from the way that myelin works. And so what's going to happen is that your brain, when you're doing it, will be a little bit more challenged than regularly. But you really won't do it for anywhere near as long. And so those moments of intense focus, they don't need to be that long. Probably I sometimes only spend 30 seconds on a thing. Now, just to sell this a little bit more, because I think it's so counter to the muscle memory idea of practice. The reason why a lot of people, and myself included, quite frankly, reason why we like the many hours approach is, one, it's a number right then and there, right? That's a metric, and we can point to that metric and be like, I did something. The other appeal is that it produces more. So for example, if you're working a job and you give your best effort for like 2 hours, the rest of the 6 hours of your shift is going to suck. In our working life and in pretty much society in general, you're asked to have a big output. Yes, if you do more for 8 hours, you will have done more. And that's great if you're making videos or whatever. But if you're trying to train the skill, you actually are better off using less time and then a little bit spaced out practice sessions. So let's talk about some varied ways to practice, because I've given you like one solution for the tongue and like 2 solutions for the torso. I'm going to talk about a little bit more options, because maybe you find one thing boring, or maybe it's too hard, or it doesn't fit into your life. So it's good to have options. So let's walk through that. In addition to the shoulder roll, you can do arm circles, which I prefer because it also gets the chest. And a chest is, again, one of those muscles that if it's tight, the back ends up working, you feel in your armpit, ends up working to kind of stabilize that. It's not as impactful as the abs, but it's still a factor. So I really like those arm circles where like it's so much, your whole body is swaying. The hips are swaying and you're not like trying to control it, right? That's a great one. Sometimes, even if you're not getting pulled down by the tongue or the omohyoid, the scapula, sometimes your soft palate will still be drooped just because it's habitual. So a good way to figure that out is you can do an inhale K. And what that'll do is it will lift your soft palate, and you can kind of feel what that soft palate looks like, or what it feels like, especially when it's lifted. I actually learned that one from beatboxing. I have work to do. If the tongue, the raspberries are going well for you, but you're having a lot of trouble, or if those raspberries really don't work for you, you can do another exercise. If you're gently just kind of sway back and forth to make sure that those muscles are not so tight, it doesn't have to be a large motion, just kind of like this works. And then what you want to do is you want to speak and or sing on an NG, like singing, talking. What that'll do is it'll put your tongue onto your teeth and onto the soft palate. Now, when the soft palate narrows, so does the sides of the tongue. So if you can't kind of chew on your tongue a little bit, it will be demonstrative of the soft palate being drooped. However, and this is so important, this deserves its own little section. The primary way that people deal with tension or difficulty is a tightening of the jaw, which actually makes quite a bit of sense. If you're having trouble raising your larynx, a tightened jaw will raise the muscles that are responsible a lot for pulling things down. This is where you get a lot of strain and an inability to talk for long periods of time, as well as just a strained way of speaking. But before we berate that idea, like, I can't just tell you, like, don't tighten your jaw. That's not how this works. The tightening of the jaw happens in response to a lot of these other problems that I've been talking about. So even though the exercises like the spectrogram, the NG and all that stuff, you can kind of fool yourself by looking at all these physical little tips and tricks and be like, it's working, but then your jaw is tight. So similar to a lot of the other concepts that we've been talking about, movement being something that informs a lot of this, you can mix and match the exercises. So if we have it and we're rocking that and it feels good, or because we can't do it, what we can then do is we can do circular motions with our jaw. Now, this might be absurdly weird and funny to you, but I assure you, if the exercise isn't bizarre and deranged, it's probably not a good singing exercise. I guess in this specific context, it would be speaking exercises, but anyway. So I've covered what I know, and like in one attempt and one sitting, I think I did an okay job at outlining some problems as well as some solutions. But the most important thing is that you're going to need probably, and I think this is true of everybody, the best situation to have is individual input. I abhor the idea of charging people who are looking for voice feminization when, one, there are too many people charging who are clearly either incompetent, don't have good intentions, or they have good intentions, but they're not the best at doing this sort of thing. I'm gonna make a promise. I'm gonna try to keep it. If you have questions, go ahead and comment in the subreddit, and I will try to get back to you. If you have recordings, that's the best, because then I can really look at what you're doing and hear it and be like, okay, that's what's happening here. If you think that's bizarre, my professor, my teacher, who, if you want her information, I'd be happy to give that. She won't be available for any free resources, but she's extraordinary. And this is who I've learned all this from. Anyway, back to the point. I'm probably going to reserve help for people that submit a recording, because if you're chatting and the right side of your tongue is contracted because you're doing this, I can hear that. I've been doing this for 16 years. I know I look like I'm 12. I'm 34. My wife and I get this all the time. The amount of times when I was working at Trader Joe's, the amount of times that I would get carded, the amount of times that I would get asked, can you sell alcohol? Anyway, it's probably not a good thing to complain about looking at. Regardless, if I hear it, I can usually see it in my mind's eye. Not every time, and you might see kind of a pattern to my advice, because the best way to help folks, I think, in a general forum like this, is to give kind of general fix-alls. Definitely, like, if you're doing that and something is not working, reach out. But again, I'm going to try my best to answer everybody, but I'm not like I'm I got a job and I worked a lot, and I am married, and life, which I wish were not an issue, particularly in this situation. But like I said, I will try. So please, if you have any questions, and if you have any questions, or if you have any recordings of yourself and you're having some difficulty, I really I want to help, because like I said in the beginning, my friend took years of looking for advice and found nothing that was helpful, or it was like a generic list, or it came from terminology that was kind of condescending, because it was like, use your breath to use support. And you're like, what the hell does that mean? Like, I'm supporting. And then the teacher's like, no, you're not supporting. And you're like, why? What is support? I want to know. So yeah, that sort of a thing is not helpful for me as a singer, let alone, I'm sure, as for working on voice feminization. So I hope this helps. The intent is good. I may post this on YouTube if you all find this helpful. I can put it elsewhere. I want to be humble, because this is not my area. I don't have a degree in this. I'm not an academic in this. But the fact that academics are not competent in this, with an exception, actually, there is a fantastic academic book on voice feminization and the consequences of using your voice for someone who has testosterone-laden folds or estrogen-laden folds, right? Adapting the musculature, the anatomy to the sound that we want. This is a book that exists, and it is written by a trans woman. At least I'm almost positive. I have to go back and look at I reached out to someone at Chicago Conservatory, where this is a little bit more studied, and this was the individual in the book that I was referenced. So the issue with that book, even though you'd be supporting great studies and all that, this is the only academic study with any writings that you can purchase that have any sort of legitimacy. As far as I know, this was 2 years ago when I had this conversation. So the things probably have changed, but it still stinks, because these are academic writings. The language is not very approachable, and on top of that, this particular resource is $200, which is a big yikes. The research is warranted, the cost is warranted. It's all very useful. It's just not everybody can afford $200. So yeah, please let me know if you find a better resource than this video. I would love to recommend the work of a specialist. I really would. I watched my friend Amaya go through this for 2.5 years, and she was like, I could use some help. I pay for lessons, and I was like, no, don't do that. A specialist, and 2.5 years, and she's trans. That's only the time that I've known her. She's been looking for stuff on voice feminization for, I don't know, it's been a long time. So anyway, I hope this helps. Again, I will try to get to any questions